Hi, Jay, and welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate being here. I've looked forward to it.
Yes, and of course I'm here too in the other sort of middle part of the country. But it is great. We've talked about you and seen things and engaged. It's the first time we've seen you face to face, which is really terrific. Which may sound odd for the podcast, but we're doing this on video as well, boys and girls.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad we did, and it is face to face. Thinking about the last couple of years where we're stuck in doing therapy in our homes and using the video. There are many of my patients I've never actually been in front of them. It's always been virtual. So
Yeah.
we get used to it.
And we're learning ways of engaging with it, and all automatically our systems are working it out for us, and it's quite nice. It's different, but it's not. It's just something to be worked with. But here we are, and Matt. So of course we're talking about Jay's book, but Jay's work, and we want to sort of get into some of the practical aspects, and then dive in. What are we going to do, Matt?
Well, first of all, let's learn a little bit more about Jay. Jay, do you want to give us a little bit of a bio of who you are, where you're practicing, and how you came to this really unique parts and memory therapy concept?
Okay. My bio is spotty. I leave some things out. But academically, I began as an anthropologist and taught anthropology at different universities. Wrote my dissertation on psychological anthropology, but left that field entirely and discovered after some years psychology, which was my dream as a young person, but I never got around to it until quite late. And then about 25 years ago, I began to study psychology in earnest and became a licensed psychotherapist in 1998. And then I've been practicing since then. And because I married the right woman, I have had time to start writing the books. I only published one book as an anthropologist, but now as a therapist, as a psychologist, I've published 4 and preparing for the next.
Now, you'll have to explain about your wife, because she works with you and she's a therapist as well, isn't that right?
Yes, it is. She is a therapist. She brings excitement to our work, and she's the one who can just work and work and work and work, and seemingly never get tired, and then give me the results in the morning. And I say, "What do I do with this?" Well, proofread it. But that's what happens. We do workshops and train other therapists here, and once I've told her what we're going to do, then she runs with it and takes my previous work and puts it all together in a workshop kind of form. So
partnerships
fantastic.
are wonderful. Yeah, wonderful.
Now, talking about parts of memory therapy, can you give us a little bit of background of the things that you've pulled together? I understand there's a bit of a synergy between a number of different influences that you've had to come up with this therapeutic technique.
Well, I think that the answer to that question, or what you just suggested, there being a number of influences. I'm not sure that I could name them all, but mainly it's what I found in psychotherapy when I began. I was not comfortable with the model that I was taught, and I used them because there was nothing else available, and then began to become aware of something called uh, what did you call it? Internal family systems therapy. It was the work of Schwartz, Richard Schwartz, and found that fascinating. And at the same time, I discovered the work of John and Helen Watkins, who had also published in, let's see, 99. Uh, uh, they published on ego state therapy. Those two things fascinated me. And then I got involved in the study of dissociative identity disorder. And for 12 years, I argued with the experts, since I was not an expert. And I argued with the experts and tried to convince them that they had it wrong. So that was a great time, 12 years of that. I never convinced them. But what I said they were wrong about was that having parts of the self is normal. And the position of those foundation people in on that website, their position was that no, at least early on, later they began to compromise a bit, but early on they felt that parts were the result of the breaking up of the self and into pieces. And so the job of the therapist was to put them back together again and fuse them. And I said, it's not my experience, because I just read those two sources, Richard Schwartz and the two Watkinses, and it didn't fit. And so I also went to a 1 week workshop that Richard Schwartz had. And although I favored the hypnosis-based work of the Watkinses, I actually try to use Richard Schwartz framework. But by about 2004 or 5, began to question it for my own purposes. And as a result of the arguments that I used to have with the people who studied dissociative identity disorder, I got invited to present my ideas for a workshop across the country on the other coast in West Virginia. And that was the beginning of my doing my own writing, because I had to write something up. Before I was just winging it. And so that led me to write write the notes. But then finally I published my first therapy book in 2012. That was
Right.
Parts Psychology. And at that time, the influence of Richard Schwartz's approach on my work is evident. I used much of his language. And frankly, I use the term neutralizing to refer to the disappearing act that we try to do with negative emotions. Whereas Richard Schwartz uses the concept of there being a burden. And so getting rid of it is unburdening. I use that, although by then I was already in my own right work and with my own patients using the term neutralizing, because I thought that was more accurate. And so in the last two books I wrote, I've changed completely. I no longer use any of Dick Schwartz's framework and have developed my own. And that is parts psychology on my own. But then I discovered what Bruce Ecker was bringing over from neuroscience and memory reconsolidation.
Yeah.
So I in my last two books, Healing Amelia and this current book, the guide to partial memory therapy. This is where I've tried to fully integrate the translation of the material done of the work done by the harder scientists and brought into psychotherapy by Bruce Ecker. And I've taken what I needed and built my approach from parts and from the material that Bruce Ecker brought over.
The memory
I have to say
reconciliation.
that I'm a little bit different in the way that I use the memory work,
Right.
and it's because what I learned from the Watkinses, especially Helen Watkins. She wrote a paper in 1980 in which she demonstrated how to effectively neutralize the anger of a part of one of her patients. She was working in hypnosis, and she called the paper silent abreaction. Abreaction referring to what used to be a rather volatile and violent expression by a patient of his or her pain. And she showed how to do it with hypnosis, and essentially in hypnosis by exhausting herself, that is the patient's part. So here's my first introduction to parts. Helen Watkins helped the patient take a walk with her on a mountain path. And that appears to be a part that she was working with, the angry part. On the path, they came across a boulder, couldn't get past it. Helen said, well, there's a club, a wooden stick, just break up that boulder with it. And of course, wood doesn't break stone, but it exhausted her. And as a result of that exhaustion, working in the hypnotic setting, just exhausting herself in trying to burst that rock out of the way, the patient reduced her anger in just the way that Helen Watkins intended to. And then that was a result of work in the 1970s. Richard Schwartz's work, I believe, starts in the early 1980s. And then I combined the Watkins work with the Schwartz work, as I said. And what I gained from Richard Schwartz in terms of parts, though, was his concept that we take individual parts, we find individual parts that specialize in different roles in the working of the mind, and then those parts who have roles that are problematic for the patient are the ones that need to be, in his work, unburdened, because over time they acquire emotional burdens. And so the work aims at neutralizing, his word, unburdening those burdens. And it worked pretty well. And I found neutralizing better for my taste, and went off in a different direction in other areas that we disagree on, that we don't need to get into here. People can disagree and still appreciate.
Yes, quite so.
Work.
Yeah, because it's really interesting, this nature of what we talk about using this term parts. And some people find it difficult to grasp. Others people find it very easy to grasp. And I know we'll go through the sort of the step process or sort of the progressive process that you use. But I just wanted to bring in a bit of my own anecdote because a lot of people are aware that I was an actor. I was a professional actor for 20 years, which I thought was terrific training for being a psychotherapist because you got to play lots of different people. But it was this type of thing. It was I almost describe the way you worked was you imagined yourself as like a large music fader desk, a music desk, and there's all these different parts, and you could raise or lower the energy of them. And in doing so, you altered the nature of what you appeared like, altered the nature of the character. And I remember the thing that actually it was this ability to move and change, and as you say, energize some parts, exhaust other parts to dissipate them, was when I was doing an improvisation in the early stages of my study. And I was about 6 months in, and I began improvising a bit about a relationship problem I was having with a lass in the class who was probably improvising on her relationship. And about halfway through, suddenly it began to be the relationship I was having with this girl, this totally fictional, in the moment, a different experience that had frameworks and elements of what I was doing, my persona, but I was saying things and was almost like there was two of me. There was an observer part of me looking at this operator, this actor, and going, oh, look, gee, that's interesting, Richard. I don't know why you said that. Oh, gosh, I wouldn't have done that. I wonder why you're doing it. It was really quite amazing. But at the end of the experience, it was just this extraordinary revelation of how I have the capacity to adapt and adjust and shift the elements within me. And I'm guessing that this is what you're doing, because this is what I've been looking to do with people ever since. And this is what I see in your work, this capacity to find the way to manipulate and reorganize those elements, those parts, which in acting was what we were supposed to do. So can we get on to that? How do you get them there? I mean, I had to embarrass myself in front of lots of people and say and do very weird and peculiar things. Not necessarily the most recommended way of doing positive therapy. So you've got this process. What do you do? How do you get them to be realizing and working with these things?
How do you get patients to do so?
Well, just in those lovely that 4-part process that you use, or four-step process you use.
All right. So that 4-step protocol that I use is an overview, mostly for teaching other therapists how to use this approach. But I follow this protocol, and if I get lost in where I am with a patient, I go back into my brain and find my notes and say, oh, yes, I'm at stage 2 or 3 or whatever. But I'll tell you what they are. And the first one simply says that we have to define the problem. And in order to define a problem in a way that we can work with it in therapy, it needs to be expressed in simple terms. Maybe other approaches can deal with complex, abstract language, but for this work, we need simplicity in the sense of concrete terms. And so instead of saying, for the patient to say, I've got low self-esteem, I would rather she or he say, oh, when the boss walks in, I can't talk. I get too nervous to talk. So, which is a sign of low self-esteem. So it's that behavior and that perception of being unable to speak when the boss walks in. That's what I'm going to work with, not the abstract low self-esteem. So that's number one. Define it in terms that we can use and that we can bring to the place where ultimately will neutralize the memories that created that low self-esteem. And the second step, and the second step is simply, now that we know what the target is, now we got to find the part that carries that problem. So I want to find, in the case, since I started with low self-esteem, I want to find the part who certainly has low self-esteem and who influences the patient in that way, such as perhaps that part whispering in the patient's ear, "Oh, you can't do that. That's too much for you. They won't like you over there." And that might be one way that low self-esteem is expressed, but there's so many different ways. So I don't mean to imply all low self-esteem is due to what I just use as examples. But so that part that we find, that I say whispering, it's really, that part is a part of what constitutes the self. And it's not always paying attention, but when it does influence itself, it does so seamlessly, since all of the parts that make up the self have the ability to blend and bring about new behavior, thinking, and actions for each of us. We all have parts that we're influenced in that way, such as if I get angry, I'm going to raise my voice and I am going to start speaking with defiance. Nobody mess with me, for example. Then we know my angry part's taken over. And that's true of everyone. The parts influence us to behave in the way that they conceive of themselves, meaning parts. So the second step is find the part that carries the problem. And that's very simple to do. In 80% of my patients, we can do it in our first effort.
Now that's, sorry, Jay, these are parts that carry the problem. They're not necessarily the parts that are the problem. That be correct?
I would say both. Yes.
Both.
They carry the problem, and that they carry the memories that created the problem, and they express the thoughts and feelings that are the problem for the patient, who then is affected by the influence of them.
Okay, I just wanted to just explore that a little bit, because it's not like we're wanting to eliminate a certain part. It's more the part is carrying that problem. Yeah.
Yes. So we certainly don't want to eliminate the part.
No.
Yes,
we want to tame it.
Yes, and that's what we're going to go to in 3 and 4. I would imagine. So we've as just sort of there we are. As we interrupted you there, sort of talking about.
No, that's fine.
We found what part is the context of this. So then we go to step 3. What do you look at then?
So then we interview, and we actually interview the part that we found. And in order to do that, we have to differentiate or dissociate the part from the rest of the community of selves, so that we can guide the patient in asking the part, what is its answer to my question? So I have to work hard at this point to convince the patient not to give me his or her words, but to give me the impression of what you're learning from the part here that we found. So I want to identify the part, and then I want to ask that part, the part that we found, and this is one of 2 types of structural parts. This is a part that I call the freestanding part, because it's not stuck in any particular memory. I ask the freestanding part for its earliest disturbing memory of any kind. And that memory then becomes the target for neutralizing. And it might be the memory of father or mother suppressing creativity or suppressing library visits because they're not interested in that. They'd rather go to the races. So at any rate, being disapproved of is likely to be one source. And we neutralize whatever memory that part has included in its set of memories. So every freestanding part has its own set of linked memories. They're linked by themes, and the themes are themselves all about events that cause or have led to the adult's low self-esteem. So there's our target, the memories, and then comes step 4. How do we neutralize those memories that have affected the future so powerfully? Step 4 means neutralizing it, and that's neutralizing with the help of the work in memory reconsolidation. So we identify the problem, and we activate the second type of part, and it's the stuck in the memory part. It has no knowledge of what's going on in a patient's life. It is stuck in that time and place of the trauma or the hurtful or otherwise disturbing memory. And so it's a different kind of consciousness, really, that this second kind of part has. So then I'll guide my patient in getting to know this stuck in the memory part. And it turns out, as crazy as it is to perhaps the average person, the patient or the therapist can have a conversation directly with the part that is stuck in the memory. So we could be talking with a 5-year-old part stuck in the memory part of an adult who is 40. And that part, that stuck in the memory part, is important because it is the one that experienced the pain.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Joe. I saw a fabulous exercise that somebody did when I was in a discussion group about this some years ago, talking about this being stuck in that development, that developmental sticking, and we sort of knew where we were going, but the lecturer was keeping us a little bit his goal ambiguous, and we had some pieces of paper and pencil on the paper and in front of us, and he said, "So quickly, just draw a house for me." And so we all just quickly drew a house on the piece of paper. And then he said, just hold them up for everyone to see. And as you looked around the room, there was everything from just, sort of 4 lines with a bit of a square window and a door and a chimney to a 3D sort of landscaped direction. And he said, I can reasonably safely say that each of you are expressing where you stopped developing as an artist. Now, of course, not developing as an artist is not a terrible thing and isn't going to dramatically affect your life. But you see how you can? And it really I thought, wow. And of course, then because of that, I went on and I tried to develop myself as an artist. So I wasn't quite so childlike. But this whole thing is, and I'm working with a client and I'm utilizing a lot of the ideas that you're expressing. And part of her development in some respects is still in early teenage. And now she's in her 40s, and she says, well, how do I do this? How do I catch up? And so that's another part of the process too, because we're literally having to catch up 20 years of that wonderful thing in life where you could just make mistakes and you learn from them very simply. Right. Whereas, so what that process of catching up the historic, that development, how rapidly can that be done? Or is it very individualistic? Or what's the sort of way you approach bringing them back into a current state with those parts?
And I think you covered all the bases there, from a very short time to a long time.
Right.
But I did guided intervention this is Tuesday in our time. So Monday, last night, I guided one intervention for one problem, and it took 20 minutes. And the problem was this patient was she was seeing me for other things as well. But one of her problems was she was learning a new trade, a new way of making a living, and taking a course in that. But whenever the trainer got in front of her, she became fumble fingers and couldn't put the things where they were supposed to put, to be put, and so forth. And she asked, "Can you help me with that? I get so nervous when I feel someone judging me." Well, I said, sure. And we already had the foundation of how to work with parts. So that part I didn't have to explain. Once a patient learns how we're working together, things go very quickly sometimes. And I asked her to, if she could see herself in that memory she's telling me about of how she was fumble fingers in front of her trainer. So in this case, this stuck in the memory part is not years ago. It was just the week previous. But there's the stuck in the memory part. And then after introducing herself and me, I asked her to ask the fumble fingers part for her earliest disturbing memory of any kind. And the memory she came up with was a memory of being in the 4th grade in a new school, and she was the only person of her ethnicity, and 2 girls in front of her, and she didn't know anyone, new school for her. 2 girls in front of her began talking to her about how they wouldn't look like she does, and naming her characteristics. And so there was our target. She was devastated by that. It affected certainly her self-esteem, and turns out it affected her nervousness, being judged by others. In this case, she was being judged by these 2 girls ahead of her. So we neutralized that by asking the after setting up the program, we neutralized it by asking the patient to focus on that memory of being the one way back, the 4th grader, and asked the 4th grader, "Oh, what disturbed her?" And then we used I don't remember using wind, water, or fire, but we used one of those as a means of cleansing, symbolically cleansing the 4th grader of the hurt and the pain she felt. But the key is that once we neutralized that and we came back to the scene where she was all fumble fingers in front of the trainer, she was calm. And I also think about the further training you're going to get next week. Imagine yourself there. She's calm. So that single incident, that single intervention fixed that problem. Doesn't seem like much, but it was for her, and it was gone. And then other times I've worked for years in very complex cases with one patient.
Yeah, sometimes it's a single thing. Sometimes it's, you peel one bit off and the onion keeps having to be peeled. But yeah, no, that answers my question very well. Thanks.
Yes. So in that example, when we're talking about memory reconsolidation and we're juxtaposing one emotional memory with another, you use this imagery of fire, of cleansing, as the juxtaposition. Now, do you always do this juxtaposition of the emotional content to clear clear that disturbing memory within the part, or do you utilize other parts to come in to create a contrast? How do you work that?
Well, there are three entities of the patient that I work with. That's the one who's sitting in front of me. And then there is the freestanding part who handles that general problem and who collects memories. And then three, the third entity is the stuck in the memory part.
Yeah.
And so then, since the stuck in the memory part is the one with the memory, the problem memory, then I guide the patient in working directly with the stuck in the memory part. I use the freestanding part to get us there, to locate it, and then I guide the patient to carry out the intervention with the stuck in the memory part. I don't know why I can't remember from last night, but let's say it was fire, then I would have said to her, all right, I would have said to my patient, speak to the child and ask if she would like to stop feeling that way that she feels, after we've got a number 0 to 10 for how disturbing it, and we get a yes. Then I ask the patient to choose wind, water, fire, or any other symbolically cleansing or disappearing for that emotion. And let's say she chose fire, then I would say, all right, so to the patient, take that little girl over in memory form, take that little girl over and let her throw all of her negative feelings that she feels into the fire and watch them burn up. Just keep throwing until all of her embarrassment and her shame and her sadness and her fear of disappointing and all of that are burnt up in the fire. And once that little girl goes to 0 in our measurement, we're done. And then we come back, and if there are other memories that need to be healed, held by the freestanding part, then we'll go to the next one, the next earliest one. But in the case of last night, it only took one.
That's interesting that the symbology would have to be emotionally salient enough to change the emotional memory content. And so that's
that's the way that I do it, but I'm really not sure. I haven't tried something else. I've used the cartoon dynamite that from years ago, the big red sticks with the long fuses, and I had the patient throw their pain onto that pile and then throw a match on and blow it up. That works.
Do you do chair work as well? Like physically, do you move clients around, do chair work, that sort of thing to sort of enhance that? No. Okay.
I haven't found it necessary. Maybe I could reach that other 10% if I did.
Right.
But I've great success with about 90%. Already they can visualize a part, and I've found ways of helping them to visualize a part at that early stage when they're trying to find the part. Found ways of doing that as well.
I really because my suggestion of what I'm seeing here is that, of course, here we're talking about what we might is loosely called mind to body sort of healing, mind to body changes, or sort of from our thinking, from our cognitive state to the actual physical change. But this is the point when you're thinking of the body as a complex system where it's all a dynamic integration and interaction, is that the memory reconsolidation process, the synaptic connections that create what's associated, and also the intensity of the reactions become labile, become separate, and then it's this attitude, this orientation, this symbolic representation that come through, whether it's a fire or a firecracker or water, or strangely, when you were saying, I imagined myself cleaning something with chewing gum, where I stuck it to the chewing gum and threw it away, just as a quick thought. But all these things stimulate the neurons to reconsolidate themselves within the context of that new perception of that there's the juxtaposition, as you brought up beautifully, Matt, that technical term that Bruce Ecker uses. And it seems so simple, but it is. In other words, our neurobiology and our biology is already organized to move towards beneficial change. And it's just a matter of taking the actions that are necessary. Yeah, taking the actions that work. Yeah. And those early models you study weren't doing that. And I can understand, because there are quite a few I've, well, not so much discarded, but I've just taken a couple of elements out and left the rest of the method away.
Yeah, well, certainly we know people in the internal family systems model who say that memory reconsolidation really is the mechanism of transformative change, within their work. So yes, it all works together. And now, Jay, you wanted to talk a little bit about features. Let's sort of transition into talking about features.
Well, I took some time just to make note of several things that are different, that I think are different and interesting about parts of memory therapy. And one of those is that, as far as I know, we are the only model that combines verbally, acknowledges that we are combining the work in parts and the work in memory reconsolidation to produce the synergy, the work. And then I also make explicit that the self is an amalgam of parts. The parts that make up the self are those freestanding parts I was talking about. In fact, part of my definition of a freestanding part is that it is either sharing the consciousness of the whole person or is capable of doing so in the definition. That's unlike the case with the stuck in a memory part, where it is separated from that. So that's the second step, or part of the second step is really something I borrowed from Francine Shapiro, and in her 2001 book, in which she suggested that all or most mental health issues are the result of trauma or trauma-like experiences. And so that is also what I say, but I do acknowledge where I got that thought, and it makes sense for me to accept it as my own. And the self is an amalgam. Then I've already mentioned that there are two structural parts, whereas as far as I know, others who talk about parts are really talking about a single structural type. They have many different ways of presenting themselves depending upon the context. It can be anger or sadness or fear or worry, but they're all one type. But you can see clearly that the stuck in a memory part, which has no access to current events in the patient's life, and the freestanding part are structurally different. And we can't do memory work unless there is one of us in the memory that we have, because if we're not there, there is no memory. A bit obvious, perhaps. Then I also noticed that, and this is actually what Ecker says about working with memory consolidation, but I like to emphasize it. When we neutralize a part and of its negative emotions or body sensations, and you take it to zero, it's truly zero. That will never, ever be a problem again for that part and that memory. There may be overlapping memories held by other parts, but not for that part and that memory. No matter what the stress is, and Eckert often makes the point that when we're talking about traditional approaches, such as desensitization, under stress, the same phobias, the same problems come out again under heavy stress. Not true of this, and they can't, because once we've neutralized it, as you were pointing out, Richard, the brain changes, and the elements that make up, or the neurons in which they're stored, the emotions or the body sensations, they're gone.
Yeah,
They're not in the brain anymore. And so it cannot happen.
It's completely changed. It's what, well, as what Dan Siegel says, the flow of energy and information, and this is, of course, absolutely vital for an adaptive species. I mean, when people say, "Oh, you can't lose or change," you say, "Of course you can." The whole point is that what you had to do in order to manage life when you were 2 years old is going to be different when you're 5 and different when you're 10, because you're going to, at the very least, you're going to be a different size. So the juxtaposed truth is that you are taller. I mean, that's just one simple example. And if we didn't adapt, we'd have to, when we got to full height, we'd have to go through this is the 2-year-old behavior. No, okay, not that one. The 5, no, not that one. Obviously, we have to wipe out or at least make it no longer a necessary pathway. And it is this enormous confusion that we have when we get to the end of a part of our time of our life, when we're disturbed, to find that what you were so beautifully describing in some of those examples, oh my gosh, I am doing something that is based on a behavior pattern I established when I was in the 4th grade, and I'm still doing it now. And I simply have missed somehow my normal, natural, adaptive neurological behavior, memory reconsolidation. And this is all to do with the other traumas. And we, long story, read everybody's books, please. But, I just, it's quite exciting to think that it's not so much it's so easy, but it is so possible.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I liked. That's what I got from what you were saying, Jay.
Yeah. So Jay, as we sort of come to a close today, is there sort of some final, maybe some summary words you would like to tell our listeners,
or something we've missed? Is there?
Thank you for offering that, but I don't really know how to summarize it, except that, well, I do. I'll emphasize what I look for in the future. I believe that the memory reconsolidation on the one hand, and part psychology on the other hand, will be the future of psychology. And it will bring about a paradigm shift completely, so that these constant repetitions and filling in the tiny holes of the therapy that is now the focus of 84% of researchers in the United States, the work on, I'm missing a word here, it's the work on cognition.
Yeah, the cognitive behavioral type therapy framework.
So they're working on the outer brain and not the inner brain. where we're working. The future lies in the midbrain, not the externalization and the factual information that we all have access to. I think that would be the case. So what I'm doing, I hope, will be picked up. And I know that I share the similarities and approaches with many others. And I hope we can continue to be helpful to each other, borrow as needed.
Yes, I think returning to our naturalness of adaptivity rather than keep piling on all these options. I quite thoroughly agree with you there, Jay. So,
fantastic.
Matt, here we are. As sad as it is, we do have to limit the length of our presentations, Jay, because people stop running or reach the end of their commute or something. But Matt.
All right. Thank you so much, Jay. It's been wonderful having you here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. And as always, we'll point everybody to your resources in the show notes. But for now, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, that's fantastic. And that book, if you're watching the video version of this, that book will get a nice plug and a nice, lovely link, because it's a really important piece of work, and it's very important for us to look deeply into people like your good self. And we thank you for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
I
okay.
appreciate it.
Bye. Bye.
Take care.